It's got to be biblical.
I don't know why we practice these things. We don't. That's what it is. This is coming from wired.com. And of course, the version we have here has a paywall. So give me 1 second to click out of the paywall version. There we go. And the headline is, God did the world a favor by destroying Twitter. Ooh. Which is very fun and
is Twitter destroyed? I think it still works. I can log in.
No, this is another example of them sort of trying to name it and claim it, bro. Speak it into existence. Make people think Twitter is destroyed, even though some would say that Twitter is better than ever. But okay, God did the world a favor by destroying Twitter, and there's some very interesting elements of mainstream communication here, very interesting elements of secular representation of biblical narrative. There's just some very interesting. I was actually quite impressed with the article. What did she say?
Coming from an atheist, and traditionally, before you read it, the Tower of Babel narrative in the secular world was presented as sort of the more Gnostic or pagan version of it or whatever, where it's, God did humanity a disservice by separating languages. It was a bad guy. He's vengeful. Why doesn't he want people to unite?
Right. It was like one of those things. Like how the serpent helped Eve gain knowledge versus Eve, doing something that was against her best interests.
Right.
In the same way, Tower of Babel is the sort of wrathful demiurge, the Gnostic demiurge,
right,
carrying out some sort of childlike jealousy on people.
Right. He's jealous and he's vengeful. Yeah, that whole narrative.
Yeah. So let's get into it here.
Okay.
Quote, happy to talk about it if this is interesting. End quote. Mark Benoit, the founder of Salesforce, texted Elon Musk last spring. He continued opaquely, quote, Twitter conversational OS, the town square for your digital life, end quote. This is how billionaires communicate in slogans, brand identities, and occasional large sums. Yeah, I can back that up. They do talk like that. It's up to everyone else to figure out the details. Quote, well, I don't own it yet, Musk replied. To be fair, he was fielding a lot of text at the moment, but then he did own it. And by winter, the Twitter takeover was a giant, thorny public mess. Whatever magic spell kept people together on the platform seemed to have broken. Interesting. It was like the plot of Encanto without the happy ending. Quote, the graveyard for your digital life.
Did you see Encanto?
I did. I didn't really pay much attention to it, though.
Okay.
I was babysitting. Twitter's troubles are due not just to Musk, who appears to be both shooting himself in the foot and cauterizing the wound with his own brand of flamethrower. No, Musk is merely the vehicle. The real reason Twitter lies in ruins is because it was an abomination before God. It was a Tower of Babel.
Whoa.
Yes. And thus,
what is this, a Face Like the Sun video?
Thus, I really do admire the comprehension that this author has and the ability to see the world in this way. We don't necessarily agree on the sentiment behind the article, but he's got I have a lot of fun with the way that he talks about it. So the real reason Twitter lies in ruins is because it was an abomination before God. It was the Tower of Babel. People usually interpret Genesis 11, 1 through 9 as a mythological explanation of why we have so many tribes, so many languages. The story goes that the descendants of Noah were living in Shinar, all speaking one tongue, and decided to build a skyscraper that would let them walk straight into heaven. God went, not in my backyard, and scattered the people. This is interesting, just for a little analysis. The not in my backyard characterization, of course, referring to kind of like white liberals, rich white liberals, and hypocrisy. That's what the NOIMBYs are considered, not in my backyard type of people, is actually in line with the description of the demiurge in Gnosticism. So Gnosticism believed that Yahweh was not the actual God. He was a littler God pretending to be the real big God. And Yahweh was jealous and childlike and mean.
Yeah, it was an immature God trying to act all big.
Yeah, an immature God trying to pose as the real God. And so this kind of not in my backyard petulism is sort of, I don't know, it parallels
deep
that.
Cut of
which
the,
makes me, which again shows some very interesting insight that this author has. God went not in my backyard and scattered the people, confounding their language. I like to think that God also personally demolished the tower, but that story is apocryphal. And then he references Jubilees 10:26, which means this guy really knows, he's at least really looked into it, because he doesn't quote Jubilees. He just references it, just puts it right there. Yeah. So this is a guy who thinks like this for sure. God does the wrath thing a lot in the Old Testament, punishing humans who would challenge divine authority. It makes sense to read the story of Babel in that light. But having lived through the past couple decades of the internet, I believe the story carries a different lesson. I'm an atheist, so take this theory with a grain of salt, or maybe even a pillar. God wasn't keeping us out of heaven, smiting us for our arrogance. God was protecting us from ourselves. And I find this so fascinating that he felt the need to give a disclaimer about him being an atheist.
And then talks about how God does things.
And then sort of defending God. But I mean, the idea that God was protecting us from ourselves, that's a pretty popular evangelical understanding. And especially of sin and of a lot of, that's the defense of God's wrath in the Old Testament, in a lot of churches, is that, look, he's not stopping us because he is a wrathful, vengeful, mean guy. He is, exacting punishment specifically.
He's pruning the flower.
Yeah. Sin is not just a mean thing to do against God, but it is those limits are put for our own good. Right. That was the whole idea in the garden. It's for your own good to stay away from the tree. It's for your own good not to, commit any number of sins, especially in the Old Testament, where there's like over 600 different sins that you can commit listed in the Bible. And a lot of them, turns out, are just good advice. It's an interesting insight for this wired author to be defending this idea that God wants to defend us from ourselves, as if it's not the normal way to think about it. Now, of course, maybe calling it typical is not accurate. It may not be typical. A lot of people think of sin as specifically, an act against God for its own sake, and in a way, it is still that. But there's the recognition that staying away from sin is also for our own good, aside from the punishment we get from it. And so, just a side note, he's kind of attacking Christians in this way, in that it's like, don't be like the Christians and think that God is punishing you for no reason. Be like the atheists and think that God loves you and is trying to teach you something. Okay, you weirdo, whatever you say. Every 5 or 6 minutes, going back to the article, someone in the social sciences publishes a PDF with a title like, quote, "Humans 95% happier in small towns, waving at neighbors and eating sandwiches. When we gather in groups of more than, say, 8, it's a disaster." Interesting choice 8, because it's like there's 8 people on the ark, on Noah's Ark.
I think that's what he was referencing.
It kind of seems that way.
Yeah.
Yet there is something fundamental in our nature that desperately wants to get everyone together in one big room to, quote, solve it. Our smarter, richer, betters, in Babel times, the king's name was Nimrod, often preach the idea of a town square. This is interesting. The author, referring to like tech billionaires in Silicon Valley and leaders of that ilk as Nimrod, which is, hey, we have that in common. We kind of also would call them Nimrod in a way. Often preach the idea of a town square, a marketplace of ideas, a central hub of discourse and entertainment, and we listen. But when I go back and read Genesis, I hear God saying, quote, "My children, I designed your brains to scale to 150 stable relationships. Anything beyond that is overclocking. You should all try Mastodon." Which is funny. Mastodon is the alternative to Twitter that is decentralized. So people are fleeing the tower by millions, or at least shopping the real estate elsewhere. Discord, TikTok, Tumblr, YouTube, Instagram, WeChat, Weibo, Moj, and some are finding their tribes in the Fediverse, the set of decentralized web apps that includes Mastodon. The Fediverse is, by design, thousands of servers in many languages. They are cheap to run, at least for small groups. We've considered doing a Canary Cry Fediverse. And relatively easy to administer. You can chat among your server kin, or blog, or podcast, or share images and videos and connect with servers in the outside world. The Fediverse apps are all built on a set of rules called the ActivityPub Standard, which is a little like HTML had sex with a calendar invite. It's a little Nephilim there, a little coder.
Two kinds.
2023 Nephilim combination. Yeah. It's a content polycule. The question it evokes are the same as with any polycule. What are the rules? How big can this get? Who will create the chore chart? The true beauty of Mastodon and similar services is that they are designed to collapse. If you want to quit a server, you can take all your followers and follows with you. If a server shuts off, you can find another. It's not one guy. It accepts that as we centralize and debate, we melt down. And so it comes with a giant sticker that reads, "Babel built in." Interesting, huh?
Yep.
As the world is rooting for the destruction of Twitter, aka, following this guy's logic, the Tower of Babel of modern times, and rooting for decentralization, not just of money and cryptocurrency, but of
the
places we gather, digital gathering places. The alternative, being Mastodon or the Fediverse, has a sticker called Babel built in, meaning when this gets too big, we will destruct it. It will destruct itself, or God will destruct it. Who knows? How will these smaller groups of happier people be monetized? This is a tough question for the billionaires. Happy people, the kind who eat sandwiches together, are boring. They don't buy much. Their smartphones are 6 versions behind and have badly cracked screens. They fix bicycles, and when they talk, then they talk about fixing bicycles. Then they show their friend, who just came over for no reason, how they fixed their bicycle. And their friend says, "Wow, good job." And they make tea. That doesn't seem like enough to build a town square on.
Yeah, it sounds like this guy's been watching some people.
It's got a real imagination.
Yeah.
But someone will figure out the details. The reason the Babel story matters is not that it happened once, but that it happens over and over. We Babelize and de-Babelize. The internet is an engine of both processes. Eventually, brands will find purchase in Mastodon's rocky soil, another allusion to a parable by Jesus, and grow engagement. Engagement, in this case, replacing the word gospel from the parable. It's fun.
That's what corporations want.
Yeah. Billionaires will order the construction of new marketplaces of ideas. Everything will centralize again, and it will seem eternal, as if the tower could never fall. For now, let's enjoy the scattering. What an interesting fella this guy is. And I got to say, I find it hard to disagree with his sentiment in this article. What do you think?
Yeah, I was impressed. My initial reaction was being impressed by an atheist actually applying, or at least taking the Babel story, the Tower of Babel story, and accurately reflecting on it. Of course, he does it in his own way to make it his own thing with the anti-Twitter sentiment, but this general idea of
thoughtful use of the biblical narratives,
right? To explain this idea of something of centralization and decentralization, the repetitious nature of it, because we are clearly in a decentralized revolution right now. I think that's why even maybe Elon's playing the God role there. He's like, no, centralizing is bad. He basically said at the beginning of the show, the Tower of Babel is no good. We must stay, diversified in case something happens. So yeah, the phenomenon you and I have seen it coming for a long time, because the terminology comes out of the crypto world, decentralized, blockchain, whatever, all that kind of stuff. But truly, the reason why cryptos became so popular in the last few years is because it presented a narrative of, hey, everything we do online, all this digital infrastructure is way too centralized.
Yeah.
So very few people control everything. And the honest truth is that a lot of crypto projects, companies, whatever, they are also relying heavily on centralized products and services.
Yeah, it's trying to decentralize with a centralized mindset. That's what the whole idea behind Web 3.0 is. You have all of these active technocrats or futurists or technologists or whatever, pushing towards mass decentralization, decentralizing everything,
right?
Versus Web 2.0, which was mass centralization. So, applying the Babel narrative to the internet as a cycle of centralizing and decentralizing, I think is intellectually rigorous. I think it stands up. But I have a hard time thinking that anybody without an intimate relationship with the Bible having this article having an effect on them might be besides the point. But
yeah. Well, I don't know. It's just a step away from acknowledging God's judgment upon things,
right?
But it is interesting because he's sort of using it as an example, but he's also saying that it's kind of built in. It's part of the motherboard of everything is that there's this ebb and flow built in. I don't know. It seems to me that, and part of this is maybe my own filtering of this guy, but I've noticed that a lot of secularists, atheists, are struggling to maintain a type of hard atheism that was popular 20 years ago, maybe.
Right.
Because philosophically, technologically, even scientifically, we're starting to it's that Jasper, I can't remember the guy's name. The quote about the scientists scaling the mountaintops and then reaching the peak, and theologians are sitting there for centuries. It's this idea that we've kind of been seeing the world the way that the Bible says it is, and the scientists are kind of running out of room of like, well, simulation theory. It's the world is a computer, and it's like, well, maybe there's a programmer then. It's like, well, no, because multiverse. It's like they're running out of. They don't know where to go with it. So at least they're starting to embrace maybe some of the principles that are involved in some of the more fringier parts of the Bible, including the Tower of Babel, which is a big part of the whole biblical narrative. The people in church don't know enough about it. I think in general, they don't know enough about it.
A chapter 2 of the creation narrative.
Yeah.
I mean, it's literally like the second thing that happens after.
Yeah. And Jesus talking about, as it were in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the coming of the Son of Man. Noah lived 350 years after the flood.
Right.
He was around when the Tower of Babel stuff was happening. It's only 2 or 3 generations from Noah. that Nimrod pops up. And also, the Bible talks about Nimrod becoming a Gibborim, a mighty man. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, well, what did he do? What did he do to become a Gibborim? The same word Gibborim is used in Genesis 6 of the Nephilim. So, they were the Gibborim. So, I don't know. Some interesting things there. They're almost there. These atheists, they will be ranting about the Nephilim soon enough.
It kind of goes back to the age of re-enchantment with Carl Teichmann. It does. I mean, this is a re-enchantment, in this case, of tech reporting, which has been a fairly unenchanting industry for some time. Face
like the Sun and the Canary Cry stuff, we've been talking about the Tower of Babel in the sort of eschatological, technological context for so long that, and I know we're not the only ones doing it, but this author must have been presented with some type of similar material to at least get that
another example
in his head.
Another example of the Illuminati tuning into the show.
He's just stealing our ideas. Yeah. There you go.
All right.